Montana Territory, 1875. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Cottonwood Springs, a frontier town clinging to existence between the rolling plains and the jagged mountains beyond. Owen Blackett adjusted his worn leather gloves and squinted at the horizon, his lean frame casting a long shadow across the dirt road. At 25, he had already lived several lifetimes worth of struggle in the unforgiving West. The young cowboy pushed back his tan Stetson, revealing a face too handsome for the harshness it had witnessed, strong jaw, clear blue eyes, and just enough stubble to hint at the man without obscuring the youth. "No sense in getting comfortable anywhere," he muttered to himself, a mantra he had repeated since finding his family's homestead burned to the ground 3 years prior. "The frontier gives and the frontier takes. Ain't no place for putting down roots." Owen had made his peace with solitude. In his experience, caring for others only gave the cruel West another weapon to use against you. Better to drift with the seasons, working cattle drives in summer, odd jobs in winter, and keeping emotional entanglements as sparse as the rainfall. He had convinced himself that loneliness was simply the price of survival out here. The town bustled with unusual activity as Owen tied his chestnut gelding to the hitching post outside the general store. A steady stream of wagons had been arriving all week, and the normally quiet settlement hummed with anticipation for the upcoming Founders' Day celebration. Owen had only stopped in Cottonwood Springs to resupply before heading north to a ranch that needed experienced hands for the summer, but the extra coin he could earn helping with preparations was too tempting to pass up. Mr. Blackett, Harold Murphy, the town's mayor and owner of the general store, waved from the boardwalk. "Just the man I need, strong back, quick hands." Owen nodded respectfully. "Sir. Got a special delivery coming in on tomorrow's stage, wedding dress from back east. Need someone to help set up the pavilion for the ceremony too. Pay is fair." "Getting hitched yourself?" Owen asked, accepting the canteen of water Murphy offered. The older man laughed. "Heavens no, my niece Emma. Been living with her aunt in Boston getting educated, but she's coming home to marry Thomas Wheeler, the banker's son. Been arranged for years." Owen had little interest in town gossip or matrimonial affairs, but work was work. "I can handle that." "Good man," Murphy clapped him on the shoulder. "The stage arrives at noon. The dress needs special handling, cost a fortune to have it made to measure and shipped out here." The following day, Owen stood at the stage depot as the coach rolled in, trailing dust and bringing the usual assortment of mail, supplies, and the occasional passenger. What he didn't expect was the young woman who emerged after the driver helped her down. She was breathtaking in a way that struck him speechless, not for her slenderness, for she possessed none, but for the radiant dignity with which she carried herself. Emma Thompson was 22 years old with golden blonde hair arranged in an elegant coiffure beneath a fashionable blue bonnet that matched her traveling dress. Her figure was substantial, with generous curves that her tailored garments embraced rather than concealed. But it was her eyes, deep green and intelligent, that caught Owen's attention, along with the slight apprehension behind her composed smile. The whispers started immediately. "That's the bride," someone murmured. "Thomas Wheeler is marrying her," another voice hissed. "Must be for the Thompson land, look at the size of her." Owen's jaw tightened at the unkind comments. He'd seen the cruelty of men in gunfights and range wars, but there was something particularly despicable about this casual viciousness directed at a young woman who had done nothing to deserve it. "Miss Thompson," he stepped forward, tipping his hat. "Owen Blackett, ma'am. Your uncle asked me to collect your things and escort you to the store." Emma's eyes met his, searching for mockery and finding none. "Thank you, Mr. Blackett." "That's very kind." Her voice carried the refined tones of her Eastern education, but underneath lay the warmth of the West. As Owen helped gather her trunks and the special crate containing her wedding dress, he noticed how carefully she held herself, as if expecting judgment from every quarter. "Been away long?" he asked, loading her belongings onto a wagon. 7 years, she replied, accepting his hand to climb aboard. "I was 15 when I left for my aunt's home in Boston." Owen clicked to the horses, setting them in motion. "Must be strange coming back." Emma's gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. "Indeed, everything seems smaller than I remember, except—" She paused, a flash of vulnerability crossing her features before she composed herself again. Accept people's capacity for making their thoughts known. The comment struck Owen like a physical blow. He had witnessed how quickly the townsfolk had assessed and dismissed her based solely on her appearance. It reminded him of the frontier's harsh judgments, the way settlers were categorized as useful or burdensome, strong or weak, with little room for nuance. Folks talk, he said simply. Don't make them right. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. No, it doesn't, Mr. Blackett. When they reached the general store, Mayor Murphy rushed out, embracing his niece with genuine affection while casting a worried glance at her figure. Owen unloaded the trunks, carrying them inside with an efficiency born of years working cattle drives, where wasted motion could mean the difference between life and death. The dress arrived intact, Murphy asked, eyeing the special crate. Emma nodded, her expression carefully neutral. Yes, Uncle Harold. Aunt Beatrice insisted on having it made by the finest dressmaker in Boston. Owen carried the crate inside last, placing it gently in the back room as directed. As he turned to leave, he overheard Murphy speaking in hushed tones. Emma dear, you've changed since you left. Does Thomas know? Has he seen a recent photograph? Emma finished for him, her voice steady despite the hurt Owen could detect. No, Uncle, the arrangement was made years ago. I assume he still intends to honor it, regardless of changes in my appearance. Owen slipped out quietly, uncomfortable with eavesdropping but troubled by what he'd heard. The arranged marriage, common enough in territories where women were scarce, suddenly seemed more complicated than a simple business transaction between families. That evening, as Owen hammered together the last supports for the wedding pavilion in the town square, Thomas Wheeler appeared, his fine suit and slick-back hair marking him as different from the working men of the territory. You're the drifter helping with the preparations? Wheeler asked, not bothering with introductions. Owen straightened to his full height, nearly a head taller than the banker's son, Owen Blackett. I understand my fiancée arrived today. Wheeler's eyes narrowed slightly. You met her? I did. And the question hung in the air, loaded with expectation. Owen studied the man before answering, and she seems a fine lady, educated and well-mannered. Wheeler's mouth twisted. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I'm told she's... He lowered his voice, quite substantial, enormous even. The casual cruelty in the man's tone sparked something in Owen that he hadn't felt since finding his family's homestead in ashes, a protective anger that surprised him with its intensity. Miss Thompson is a beautiful woman, he said firmly. Any man would be fortunate to call her wife. Wheeler's eyebrows rose. My. Has the drifter developed an affection for my intended? How quaint. He straightened his jacket. The agreement between our families stands regardless. Her land adjoins our ranch perfectly, and once we're married, the Thompson holdings become Wheeler property. As Wheeler walked away, Owen gripped his hammer tightly, battling an unfamiliar urge to introduce the wealthy man's face to the business end of the tool. The encounter left him unsettled, not just by Wheeler's obvious disdain for his bride-to-be, but by his own unexpected reaction to it. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of preparation for the Founders' Day celebration and wedding that would cap the festivities. Owen found himself taking on more tasks than originally planned, not for the extra coin, but because each job seemed to bring him into Emma's orbit. He built display tables for the women's auxiliary, repaired the church pews, and completed the wedding pavilion with meticulous care. Emma, meanwhile, moved through town with quiet dignity despite the whispers and stares that followed her. She helped organize the celebration, her education and natural intelligence making her a valuable coordinator despite her long absence. Owen noticed how she worked twice as hard as anyone else, as if trying to prove her worth beyond her appearance or family name. On the afternoon before the celebration, Owen found Emma alone in the town's small library, reorganizing books that had been donated for a charity sale. Need a hand, Miss Thompson? He offered, removing his hat as he entered the quiet space. She turned, surprise giving way to a small smile. Mr. Blackett, you seem to be everywhere these days. Just earning my keep. He moved to help with a heavy stack of books. These go where? On that shelf, alphabetically by author. She handed him several volumes. You read much, Mr. Blackett. The question caught him off guard. Most people took one look at his calloused hands and cow-worn clothes and assumed literacy was beyond him. When I can, My mother was particular about education, even out here. Emma nodded approvingly. Mine too. She would say the frontier needs minds as much as it needs muscle. Smart woman. She was. A shadow crossed Emma's face. She died while I was in Boston, influenza. I'm sorry, Owen said simply, understanding loss too well to offer empty platitudes. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the simple rhythm of sorting and shelving creating a peaceful bubble around them. Owen found himself studying her when she wasn't looking, the careful way she handled each book, the intelligence in her eyes as she assessed titles, the gentle curves of her face that he was beginning to find more captivating each time he saw her. May I ask you something, Mr. Blackett? Emma finally broke the silence. Owen, he corrected, and yes. Owen, she tested the name, then continued, why have you been kind to me when so many others have not? The directness of the question deserved an honest answer. The frontier judges harshly and quickly. I've been on the receiving end of that more than once. Because you're a drifter. He shelved the last book before answering, because I survived when others didn't. Some folks look at that with suspicion, like maybe you made it by stepping on others. Understanding dawned in her eyes, and did you survive by stepping on others? No, ma'am, just kept moving. Staying still, he paused, the familiar pain of his lost family surfacing. Staying still gets you attached to people, to places. Out here, that's dangerous. Emma considered this, yet people do it anyway. They build homes, towns, families. Some folks gamble more than others. She met his gaze directly. And you, Owen Blackett, are you a gambling man? The question hung between them, laden with meaning beyond a simple inquiry about card games or risks. Before he could answer, the library door opened and Mayor Murphy entered. There you are, Emma. Thomas has been looking for you. He wants to discuss the wedding plans. The moment shattered, Emma's expression closing like a book snapped shut. Of course, Uncle, I'll go to him now. As she gathered her shawl, she paused beside Owen. Thank you for your help, Mr. Blackett. He nodded, watching her leave with the mayor, aware that something significant had passed between them, something he wasn't ready to name but couldn't deny. That evening, Cottonwood Springs transformed for the Founders' Day celebration. Lanterns hung from every post and building, casting a warm glow over the town square where tables groaned with food and a small band of local musicians played lively tunes. Owen, having completed his tasks, considered riding out that night rather than staying for festivities that only highlighted his outsider status. Instead, he found himself lingering at the edge of the gathering, freshly shaved and wearing his one good shirt. He told himself he was just staying for the free meal, but his eyes constantly searched the crowd for a particular face. When Emma appeared, she took his breath away. Her gown was a deep blue satin that complemented her fair complexion and golden hair, which had been arranged in an elegant style adorned with small flowers. The dress was beautifully tailored to her figure, neither concealing nor apologizing for her curves. She moved with the grace of someone comfortable in her own skin, even as whispers followed her progress through the crowd. Owen wasn't the only one watching her. Thomas Wheeler stood with his parents, his expression a mix of dismay and calculation as he observed his bride-to-be. When Emma approached their group, Wheeler's greeting was stiff, his kiss to her cheek perfunctory. Even from a distance, Owen could see the hurt that flashed across Emma's face before she composed herself. The evening progressed with speeches about the town's founding, recognition of original settlers, and announcements about the wedding to take place the following day. Owen found himself moving closer to the main gathering, drawn by some force he couldn't name. When the dancing began, he watched as Wheeler performed his obligatory dance with his fiancée, holding her at a distance that spoke volumes about his feelings. After that single dance, Wheeler abandoned Emma to speak with business associates, leaving her seated alone while other couples filled the square. Owen saw her watching the dancers with longing, saw the careful way she held herself against the judgment of those around her. Before he could question his actions, Owen crossed the square and stood before her, hat in hand. May I have this dance, Miss Thompson? Surprise widened her eyes, followed by a wariness that pained him to see. You don't need to be kind out of pity, Mr. Blackett. Not pity, he said firmly. Would be an honor. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her gloved hand in his. Then I accept. Owen led her to the edge of the dancing area, aware of the stares following them but focused entirely on the woman whose hand rested in his. The band was playing a waltz, and he was grateful for his mother's insistence that even frontier boys should know how to dance properly. "I should warn you," Emma said quietly as he placed his hand respectfully at her waist, "I'm not as light on my feet as some of your previous partners may have been." Owen met her gaze steadily. "I've danced exactly twice in my life, Miss Thompson. Once at my sister's wedding and once at my mother's funeral gathering. Neither partner complained about my leading, so I reckon we'll manage just fine." That earned him a genuine smile that transformed her face, lighting her green eyes and revealing a dimple in her right cheek. Owen found himself smiling back as he guided her into the dance, moving with the natural rhythm that had served him well breaking horses and working cattle. Emma proved to be a graceful dancer despite her self-deprecation, following his lead with ease as they circled the square. Owen was acutely aware of the warmth of her waist beneath his hand, the subtle floral scent of her perfume, and most of all, the way her initial tension melted away as they moved together. "You dance beautifully," he said, surprising himself with the compliment. "Thank you." A blush colored her cheeks. "My aunt insisted. She said every proper lady must know how to dance, even if—" She stopped herself. "Even if what?" Emma's eyes dropped momentarily. "Even if few would ask her to do so." The simple statement, delivered without self-pity but as a matter of fact, stirred something deep in Owen's chest, a protective instinct mixed with admiration for her resilience. "Their loss," he said simply. They danced in silence for several moments, moving with increasing confidence as they adjusted to each other's rhythms. Owen became aware of the stares and whispers around them but found, for the first time in years, that he didn't care what others thought. All that mattered was the woman in his arms and the unusual peace he felt in her presence. "Why did you ask me to dance?" Emma finally asked, her voice so low he had to lean closer to hear. "Because you wanted to dance," he answered honestly, "and because..." The music was coming to an end, forcing him to make a choice about what to say. "Because I wanted to know what it felt like to hold you." The waltz concluded before she could respond, but the look in her eyes, surprised, touched, and something deeper that he dared not name, stayed with him as he escorted her back to her seat. As they parted, her fingers lingered in his for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you, Owen," she said, using his given name for the first time. "My pleasure, Emma." Their moment was interrupted by Thomas Wheeler, who approached with undisguised annoyance. "Emma, my dear, I believe you've monopolized enough of Mr. Blackett's time. My mother wishes to discuss some details about tomorrow's ceremony." Emma's expression closed again as she nodded. "Of course, Thomas." As Wheeler led her away, he cast a warning glance back at Owen, who met it steadily until the banker's son looked away first. Something had changed during that dance, something fundamental in Owen's understanding of himself and what he wanted from life. For the first time since finding his family's homestead destroyed, Owen Blackett was questioning whether constant movement was truly the answer to survival in the West. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Owen had slept poorly, his dreams filled with images of Emma in another man's arms and the life of quiet desperation that awaited her. He rose early, intending to saddle his horse and ride out before the ceremony, telling himself it was better to resume his journey north than to watch the woman he was inexplicably drawn to marry a man who saw her only as property to be acquired. Instead, he found himself walking toward the church, drawn by a need he couldn't explain. The town was quiet, most residents still preparing for the afternoon wedding. As he passed the small building that served as the town's only hotel, he heard raised voices from an open window. "I won't do it, Father. Have you seen her? She's enormous." "I'd be a laughingstock." Owen froze, recognizing Thomas Wheeler's voice. "Lower your voice, for God's sake," came the elder Wheeler's reply. "This marriage has nothing to do with the girl's appearance and everything to do with the Thompson water rights. Without access to that creek, our expansion plans are finished. There must be another way to get the land." "There isn't." "Harold Thompson may be a fool in many ways, but he's smart enough to have tied up that property tight. The only way we get it is through this marriage, and you will go through with it as planned." "And what am I supposed to do with her?" After we're married, she's not exactly what I had in mind for a wife." The elder Wheeler's voice turned cold. "You do whatever is necessary to secure an heir, then you can keep whatever mistresses you like discreetly. Once there's a child and the property is legally transferred, we'll figure out a more permanent solution." "Like what?" Thomas asked. "Accidents happen on the frontier all the time, son. Young wives die in childbirth. Or perhaps she'll find frontier life too difficult and return east. One way or another, you won't be burdened with her for long." Owen's blood ran cold at the calculated cruelty of their plan. Without conscious thought, his hand moved to the revolver at his hip, an instinct born of frontier justice where men who plotted murder rarely lived to carry out their schemes. He checked himself, knowing that gunplay would solve nothing. The Wheelers' words alone weren't enough to prove their intentions, and frontier justice was a poor substitute for the truth. He needed to warn Emma. Moving quickly through town, Owen headed for the general store where Emma was staying with her uncle. The door was locked, but Murphy's young clerk was sweeping the boardwalk outside. "Store's closed for the wedding," the boy informed him. "I need to speak with Miss Thompson. It's urgent." The clerk shook his head. "Can't. She left an hour ago with some of the ladies to get ready at Mrs. Peterson's house. That's where all the womenfolk are doing the bride preparations." Owen swore under his breath. Mrs. Peterson's home was at the other end of town, and he knew he'd never be allowed inside with the women preparing for the ceremony. He would have to find another opportunity to speak with Emma before she made a terrible mistake. As he turned to leave, the clerk called after him, "Hey, Mr. Blackett, I almost forgot. Miss Thompson left something for you." The boy disappeared inside briefly, returning with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "She said to give you this if you came by." Owen accepted the package with surprise. "Did she say anything else?" "Just that it was a thank you for your kindness." Unwrapping the paper, Owen found a book, a collection of poetry by Walt Whitman, well-worn but carefully preserved. A pressed wildflower marked a page, and when he opened to it, a handwritten note slipped out. "To Owen Blackett, who saw me when others only looked. Thank you for the dance and for reminding me, however briefly, that there might be more to life than practical arrangements. With gratitude, Emma Thompson." The simple message struck him like a physical blow, confirming what he'd suspected during their dance. Emma was as drawn to him as he was to her. And now she was walking into a marriage that was not just loveless but potentially deadly. The hours before the ceremony passed in frustrated planning as Owen tried to figure out how to speak with Emma alone. The town filled with people arriving for the wedding, and security around the Wheeler family increased, not unusual for the wealthiest family in the territory, but an additional complication for Owen's purposes. By mid-afternoon, the church bells began to ring, calling everyone to the ceremony. Owen positioned himself near the back of the church, watching as Thomas Wheeler took his place at the altar, his expression a mask of resignation and distaste poorly concealed. The music changed and the assembled crowd rose as Emma appeared at the church entrance. Her wedding gown was a marvel of ivory satin and delicate lace, clearly expensive and custom-made to flatter her figure. Her golden hair was arranged beneath a veil that couldn't hide the sadness in her eyes as she began her walk down the aisle on her uncle's arm. Owen felt his heart constrict at the sight of her, so beautiful, so dignified, and walking willingly toward a man who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. As she passed his pew, her eyes briefly met his, and in that moment of connection, he saw resignation but also a question, as if she were still hoping for something she couldn't name. The minister began the ceremony with traditional solemnity. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and this company, to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." As the minister spoke of sacred vows and lifelong commitment, Owen thought of the Wheelers' conversation and their callous plans. When the minister reached the crucial moment, "If any person can show just cause why they may not be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace," Owen knew it was his last chance. He stood, his voice carrying clearly through the church. "I have cause." A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. Emma turned, her eyes wide with shock and something else, a flicker of hope that strengthened Owen's resolve. "Mr. Blackett," the minister said sternly, "this is most irregular. What possible cause could you have?" Owen stepped into the aisle, meeting Emma's gaze. The groom and his father plan to take Miss Thompson's property and then arrange for her death once an heir is secured. Another gasp, louder this time. Thomas Wheeler's face flushed with anger and fear. This is outrageous. This drifter is clearly deranged. I heard you and your father discussing it this morning, Owen continued steadily, through the hotel window. You called it a permanent solution to the burden of marriage to Miss Thompson. The elder Wheeler rose from his seat, his authority filling the room. This is slander. You have no proof of these wild accusations. I heard it too, came a voice from the back of the church. The hotel keeper stood, his expression grave. I was cleaning the room next door, heard every word through the wall. About getting the Thompson water rights and figuring out a permanent solution after the heir was born. Chaos erupted in the church as people began talking at once. The Wheelers denied everything vehemently, but the damage was done. Mayor Murphy pulled his niece protectively to his side, his face a mask of shock and outrage. Through the commotion, Owen kept his eyes on Emma. She stood perfectly still, the beautiful bride in the center of a storm, her eyes never leaving his face. The minister called for order, his authoritative voice gradually calming the congregation. These are serious accusations that cannot be resolved here. I cannot in good conscience proceed with this ceremony under such circumstances. This is absurd, the elder Wheeler thundered. We have a contract. A contract predicated on good faith, Murphy countered, finding his voice at last. If what these men heard is true, there was no good faith. As the argument continued, Owen moved slowly up the aisle until he stood before Emma. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I couldn't let you walk into that without knowing. She studied his face, her own expression unreadable. Did you do this because of what you overheard or for another reason? The directness of her question demanded honesty. Both, he admitted. What I heard was true, but I would have found another way to stop this even if I hadn't. Why? Around them, the argument between the families grew heated, but Owen focused only on the woman before him, finally acknowledging the truth he'd been fighting since he first saw her step down from the stagecoach. Because from the moment I saw you, something changed. The world looked different. I've spent years believing that caring for anyone was too dangerous out here, that staying unattached was the only way to survive. He took a deep breath, but seeing you walk toward a man who couldn't recognize your worth made me realize that surviving isn't the same as living. Emma's eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. And what are you proposing instead, Mr. Blackett? Time, he said simply. Time for you to know your own mind without pressure. Time for us to discover if what I felt when we danced is something real or just a passing fancy. A small smile touched her lips. And if I already know my own mind? Before Owen could respond, the argument behind them reached a crescendo. Thomas Wheeler, his face contorted with rage and humiliation, lunged forward and grabbed Emma's arm roughly. This farce has gone on long enough. The contract is signed, the dowry paid. She belongs to me now. Owen reacted instantly, his hand closing around Wheeler's wrist with enough force to make the man gasp and release Emma. She belongs to no one but herself. Wheeler's free hand went to his jacket, emerging with a small derringer that he aimed directly at Owen's chest. Step back, drifter, this isn't your concern. The church erupted in screams as people scrambled for cover. Owen stood his ground, pushing Emma gently behind him. Put the gun down, Wheeler, you're only making things worse. Worse, Wheeler laughed bitterly. You've destroyed everything with your interference, my father's plans, my future. All ruined because you couldn't mind your own business. Owen kept his voice steady, aware that frightened men with guns were the most dangerous kind. No plan built on another's suffering deserves to succeed. Wheeler's hand trembled slightly. Such noble sentiments from a saddle tramp. What were you hoping for? That she'd turn to you instead? That she'd choose a penniless drifter over a banker's son? Before Owen could answer, Emma stepped out from behind him, facing Wheeler directly despite the gun. I would, in a heartbeat I would. The simple declaration hung in the air, powerful in its conviction. Wheeler's eyes widened, the derringer wavering in his grip as he processed her words. You can't be serious, he finally managed. Look at yourself and look at him. You're throwing away security, position, everything for what? For the chance to be seen, Emma replied with quiet dignity. Not just looked at but truly seen. In that moment of distraction, the sheriff, who had been moving slowly along the wall, launched himself at Wheeler, tackling him to the ground. The derringer discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as the two men struggled briefly before Wheeler was subdued and disarmed. As Wheeler was led away, still shouting threats and accusations, Emma turned to Owen, her wedding dress slightly disheveled but her eyes clearer than he'd ever seen them. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked. "About time." Owen nodded, suddenly aware that the entire congregation was watching their exchange with undisguised interest. Every word. "And if I don't want to wait," her voice was steady, but he could see the vulnerability beneath her composure. "If I already know what I want." The minister cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps this conversation would be better continued in private. Emma shook her head, her eyes never leaving Owen's face. "No, Reverend. I think we've had enough secrets and private arrangements. I'd like to speak plainly if Mr. Blackett doesn't object." Owen found himself smiling despite the chaos of the past hour. "I've never known you to do otherwise, Miss Thompson." Then plainly, "I've spent my life being judged for my appearance, too big, too substantial, too much. I was sent east to become refined enough to overcome these supposed deficiencies. I returned to fulfill a contract made when I was still a child, believing it was the best I could hope for." She took a step closer to him. "And then you looked at me like I was beautiful. You danced with me like I was graceful. You spoke to me like I was interesting. For the first time, I felt valued for who I am, not despite what I am." The church had fallen completely silent, everyone hanging on her words. "I don't need time to know that I would rather take a chance on genuine feeling than resign myself to a safe but hollow arrangement." She took a deep breath. "So I am asking you, Owen Blackett. Could you see yourself staying in one place, with me?" Owen reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own as he considered her question. The old fear flickered briefly, the terror of attachment, of having something to lose in a world that took so ruthlessly. But as he looked into Emma's eyes, he recognized something he hadn't expected to find on the frontier: hope. "I've been running for 3 years," he admitted, "telling myself that movement was safety, that caring was weakness. But watching you face down whispers and judgment with such dignity made me realize how much courage it takes to stay, to build something lasting despite the risks." He squeezed her hands gently. "I can't promise it won't be hard. The frontier doesn't make anything easy. But I can promise that I will see you, all of you, every day and count myself fortunate for the privilege." A single tear slipped down Emma's cheek as she smiled up at him. "That's the most beautiful proposal I've ever heard." Owen laughed softly. "I didn't quite get to the proposing part yet." "Then perhaps you should," her uncle suggested from nearby, his expression a mix of shock and growing approval. Owen looked around at the assembled townsfolk, at the church decorated for a wedding, at the beautiful woman still in her bridal gown, and made the most important decision of his life. Slowly he lowered himself to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "Emma Thompson, I have nothing to offer but my heart and my hands. They're rough from work, but they'll be gentle with you. I can't promise wealth or ease, but I can promise honesty, respect, and a love that sees all of you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Emma's smile was radiant through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." The church erupted in applause and exclamations, the drama of the interrupted ceremony giving way to the unexpected joy of a true love match. The minister, recovering his composure, stepped forward. "Well, we are all gathered here already," he observed with a smile, "and the bride is certainly ready. Mr. Blackett, if you're agreeable, we could proceed with a different ceremony than the one we planned." Owen looked up at Emma questioningly. "It's your day, we can wait if you prefer." She shook her head, joy lighting her face. "I've waited long enough to be truly seen. I don't want to wait another day to begin our life together." And so, in a twist no one could have predicted, Owen Blackett, the drifter who believed attachment was too dangerous, married Emma Thompson that day in the church of Cottonwood Springs. He wore his plain good shirt instead of a formal suit, but his eyes never left his bride's face as they spoke their vows with genuine feeling that moved even the most cynical observers. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen drew Emma into a gentle kiss that promised a lifetime of seeing beyond surfaces to the truth beneath. The The cheers that followed were genuine, the community already beginning to embrace the unexpected match. Mayor Murphy hosted an impromptu wedding feast at the general store, laughingly repurposing the preparations made for the original celebration. As evening fell, Owen found a quiet moment alone with his new wife on the store's back porch, away from the well-wishers and curious onlookers. "Are you certain about this?" he asked, still hardly believing the turn his life had taken in a single day, marrying a man with no fixed address and few prospects. Emma's hand found his in the gathering darkness. "More certain than I've ever been about anything. The question is, are you ready to stay in one place, to build something permanent?" Owen thought about it, the old fear of attachment flickering one last time before being extinguished by the warmth of her hand in his. "Your uncle mentioned that the Thompson land has been without proper management since your father passed. Said it needs someone who knows cattle and horses." "It does," she confirmed. "It's good land, 300 acres with water rights and decent grazing. Too much for one person to manage alone." "But not too much for two," he suggested. Emma's smile was answer enough, but she added, "Not too much for us." In the weeks that followed, Owen and Emma Blackett began the work of transforming the neglected Thompson property into a working ranch. The townsfolk, initially skeptical of the hasty marriage, were won over by Owen's hard work and Emma's gracious manner. The couple's obvious devotion to each other silenced even the most persistent gossips. The Wheelers left Cottonwood Springs in disgrace after their schemes were exposed, their influence in the territory permanently diminished. The water rights that had been the source of so much manipulation remained securely with the newly established Blackett Ranch. 1 year to the day after their wedding, Owen stood on the porch of their renovated farmhouse, watching Emma in the garden with their infant daughter cradled against her shoulder. The land around them was coming back to life under their care, fences mended, cattle grazing on the hillsides, crops growing in the fertile soil near the creek. Emma looked up, feeling his gaze, and smiled, the same smile that had first shown him that survival alone was not enough, that a life without connection was no life at all. She crossed the yard to join him on the porch, their daughter cooing softly between them. "Happy anniversary, husband," she said, leaning into his embrace. Owen held his family close, marveling at how the very attachments he had feared for so long had become his greatest strength. "Happy anniversary, wife." The frontier remained harsh and unforgiving, the future uncertain as all futures are. But Owen Blackett had learned what truly mattered, to see clearly, to love wholly, and to find home not in a place but in the hearts of those who truly see you. In the end, it was Emma who had saved him, not the other way around. By choosing to see him, the lost and drifting man behind the capable cowboy exterior, she had given him the greatest gift of all. The courage to stop running and start building something that would last.